There is so much flavour in flour. You know, our flour has been so well received because we mill it fresh. It's stone ground, it's milled to order. It's, really flavoursome. And if you compare one type of wheat to another, when it's freshly milled, you really can taste the difference.
This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. Flour isn't just the stuff that makes a loaf of bread stand up. It's an ingredient of provenance with its own flavour and backstory. At least that's how it's done at Courtney Young's Woodstock Flour. With husband Ian, she nurtures soil, grows and sources quality grain, and stone mills it into flour of great character in Rutherglen, Victoria.
My name's Courtney Young. I'm one half of Woodstock Flour. We are based in Rutherglen, Victoria, and we mill grain grown on our farm and our family's farm and a few other growers, and we sell our flour direct to bakers across the East Coast. We started maybe 7-8 years ago now as a way to get involved in my husband Ian, his family's farm. So they're a certified organic farm out near Berrigan, New South Wales, and that's kind of the foundation. Most of the grain comes from the family farm still. And then we, a couple of years ago, bought a little farm ourselves in Rutherglen where we could really expand the flour mill and make it more of a commercial enterprise. And then we're kind of in the process of sourcing from a few more growers. And we've got kind of the organic line where we're buying grain from, Ian's parents, as I said, and then we've got a few organic growers around New South and Vic that we kind of work with, but we're also, in the process of setting up a regenerative product line. So we're looking to secure some grain from some really awesome regenerative grain growers in Victoria mostly.
Courtney didn't grow up in grain, but she has been around primary production her whole life and picked up environmental and conservationist values from her family.
Yeah, I actually grew up in Pambula on the south coast of New South Wales, and my dad was an oyster farmer. So I come from a totally different landscape. But a lot of my family were involved in broadacre agriculture, so I've kind of been around it. And then, I think my parents really instilled in me a sense, an environmentalism of some sort. I really was committed to kind of getting into environmental conservation or something like that. And I ended up in Melbourne at university where I met Ian, and I don't know how long ago is that now, like more than 10 years ago. Regenerative agriculture was just starting to really gain momentum, and both Ian and I saw that as an opportunity to do the environmental work that we were so passionate about, and also to do the community work that we care really deeply about too. We both come from rural backgrounds, so how can we build thriving rural communities? And I think the answer is through food and farming. But my dad being an oyster farmer, I definitely saw the challenges with farming, even though it's a totally different industry. I was really resisting the idea of agriculture for a really long time because of that experience of how, low the margins are. And so I think for Ian too, we both wanted to be controlling the price that we were receiving if we were going to be getting into farming. And so value adding through the flour mill was kind of the driver there. We couldn't see a future in agriculture unless we were being paid well for what we were growing.
There are a few buzzwords in contemporary farming, and regenerative agriculture is a term thrown around a lot. What does it mean to Courtney in her particular context, the grain world in Australia?
For me, and it's constantly evolving, regenerative agriculture is how can we work with natural systems? How can we work with our community to create food in a way that is beneficial for the landscape and for human and animal health. And in cropping, that's really challenging because you're working with an annual plant species. Like grain has to be planted every year in some systems, and so how can you regenerate the landscape in such an intensive system like that? And so that's been the big challenge that Ian and I have been trying to dig into, is what does it look like in Australia? Is it possible? You know, we've got this amazing history of Indigenous land management here. How can we learn from that? And how can we produce grain in a way that is respectful of our soils, our waterways, and also our communities? You know, pesticide use has massive impacts on community health and on ecosystem health, and so it's how do we bring those back a bit, and create a beneficial impact rather than detract from the landscape. We are trialing all different sorts of things, and there are so many amazing farmers also trialing and experimenting with lots of different things. But basically, we're interested in how can we bring in more diversity into our cropping systems. So that might be a multi-species cover crop over the summer. It could be planting, like this year we had clover planted with our wheat, and that clover fixes nitrogen, but it's also adding more diversity into the soil through its roots, which is more beneficial for soil microbes. So diversity is a big piece, but also thinking about inputs and fertilizer. What inputs can we use that are not super harsh on the landscape? So we're organic. So we do put out, like on the family farm, my father-in-law puts out a chicken manure pellet, sometimes with a guano. And that provides the nutrients for the crop. And then here we've been playing around with biofertilizers, which are like throwing out a sourdough starter with nutrients onto your crop, or giving your crop some delicious kimchi or something. So you've got both nutrients and biology to stimulate the soil and to support plant health. And then one big challenge for us is thinking about soil structure. How can we reduce tillage in our system so that we don't need to use a load of herbicides? And so we're looking at introducing long pasture phases. So animals are really important in our system, making sure the paddock has a break and can go into a perennial pasture for a few years to kind of restore and replenish. But for other regenerative growers, it might just be using less herbicides and thinking about, how many tractor passes you're going over, and thinking about how can we get the most bang for our buck? How can we reduce our physical impact on the soil?
Farming is a long game, and it can take a toll emotionally. What are some of the challenges for Courtney, especially when it takes a while to see the results of changes made?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge for me because I'm not a very patient person. But I think with the business, the flour mill, that's quite fast-paced, and that's where I can kind of focus my energy if things on the farm are quite slow. But yeah, we only, in this climate, we only have pretty much one window for planting and one window for harvest. And so last year, our crop kind of really held on through a really dry period, and like we really didn't get much rain in the first half of the season, and then towards the end, just as it was ready to harvest, we got a bucket load of rain, which meant that the grain kind of started to germinate, which reduces the grain quality. So that, like, stuff like that is really heartbreaking. And so you do learn to, I don't know, what are we learning to do? We're learning to kind of like moderate, not counting the eggs before they hatch, I guess. And, not getting too emotionally invested either. Like we've got to stay curious and keep experimenting. Otherwise it would be devastating and you would give up.
People tend to see flour as the white stuff that gives bread and cake its body. But what if we thought of flour more as an ingredient with culinary qualities such as flavour and aroma, as well as functionality?
Something that's really driven our business since we started is that there is so much flavour in flour, and that's why I think our flour has been so well received, is because we mill it fresh. It's stone ground, it's milled to order, and so it's really flavoursome. And if you if you compare one type of wheat to another, when it's freshly milled, you really can taste the difference. We have a wheat variety called Rosella, which is my favourite, and it's traditionally a 1980s biscuit wheat. That's how it was kind of developed, and now it's there's a big udon noodle market for Rosella, but we grow it for our kind of cake pastry flour. And one of our he's a chef in Bright at Hometown, a pizza restaurant or a pizza bar in Bright, and he was saying that one of his customers was kind of like accusing him of putting butter in the pizza dough, but he realised that it was actually just because our Rosella flour is so buttery and floral in flavour, and so it was kind of creating that sensation for the customer, which was quite cool. But yeah, I think flavour is a big driver for us, and if you have healthy plants, they're going to be more nutrient rich, and nutrients equals flavour. And then the other piece that we're kind of still trying to wrap our head around is that, a lot of bakers are really driven by protein. They're seeking out high protein flour for their bread or their pizza. But what we're seeing is that it doesn't always tell the whole picture. We were working with a high protein wheat last year, and it just didn't perform as well as we'd hoped. Like, it had an interesting flavour and gorgeous texture, but in terms of how it rose in a bread, it just wasn't quite there. And we haven't fully understood the mechanics of why that is. But then, this year at the family farm, they harvested our Spitfire wheat, and it's lower in protein, but it performs amazingly. So there's, all these different glutens in wheat that kind of interact differently, and different nutrient profiles, and there's so much complexity to wheat, I guess is what I'm saying, but I think it comes down to experimenting and being curious, and not just going off one metric, I guess, when it comes to using flour.
Nurturing soil, growing and milling are the business, but it's nothing without customers. How do Courtney and Ian engage with the people who buy, use and eventually eat their flour?
I mean, we have the most amazing customer community, and they're all coming to us for the right, because they're looking for something more. They're looking for flavour and a point of difference. But yeah, I think it's a huge missing piece in the food scene in Australia is that like we eat so much of it. You know, some people are having it 3 times a day and you don't know where it comes from or how it's grown, and you're not paying attention to how it tastes because it's not the star of the show, it's the blank canvas. So it's been really fun to work with some amazing bakers who are keen to really celebrate the grain that they're working with and elevate it and make sure that they're pairing it with the right secondary ingredients so that those flavour profiles really come through. It's been a great shift to watch.
Farming can be isolating, but Courtney and Ian are very focused on community. Who do they see in their overlapping circles of belonging?
We've got 2 young kids, and so the first thing that comes to mind is like the local school community and things. And so we're keen to, Ian has done a couple of workshops with kids around, you know, baking and how flour is milled and how it's made and how it's grown. So that's been really fun, trying to think about ways that we can educate our local community, but also just working with our local community. There's so many amazing chefs and bakers and other producers. So yeah, it's a big challenge in rural areas, you know, where there's less of a culture of spending a lot of money on food, and our flour is inevitably more expensive than the $2 bag of flour that you get at the supermarket. So just think, you know, we're constantly thinking about ways that we can expose our local community to fresh flour and fresh food in general and local food. And then, yeah, there's the farming community here as well, which we're really keen to get to know more. And we've got some amazing neighbours who are always, you know, keen to help us out, even though we're the wacky kind of organic farmers who don't seem to know what they're doing. But yeah, with like the growth of like the next stage of our flour mill, like we're really keen for the flour mill to be supporting more than just us and a couple of growers. We want it to support a real solid local community of regenerative growers. And so that's the next kind of point of focus for us, is how do we make those connections, and what does it mean for a flour mill to actively support farmers? Like what price do they need to pay? How can we be transparent in terms of communicating what those farmers are doing to the consumer, because I think that's really important. And how can we support them through thick and thin? Like the commodity system is not supporting farmers, clearly. And so what role does the flour mill have in creating community resilience is an exciting idea for us.
There are some aspects of Courtney's work that seem retro and old school, but there are others that embrace tech. How does Courtney think about this? Is it a tension?
We are like really excited by technology in the flour mill and on the farm, and we try to tread really carefully there too, because it's expensive, and we don't necessarily want a completely mechanized system where humans are disconnected from it completely as well. Like we want it to be at a human scale. But yeah, there's a huge point of tension there, and like we're pretty like we've got a stone mill, which you could argue is not necessary, but we do think the flavour of stone ground flour is superior, and there is a market demand for stone ground flour. And Ian, who's, you know, our miller, he loves the art of stone milling as well, and the skill involved in dressing the stones and maintaining the stone mill. But then we're keen to put in a bagging machine because we hate bagging flour. So there's heaps of opportunities for technology to kind of support us, but also we just need to be super conscious of what those decisions are. But yeah, I don't have the answer, and I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think there's always going to be contradictions in what we do and how we direct our business. But I think, talking to, coming back to the farmers, which is what I'm so passionate about. Like, I was talking to one farmer and he said just for an extra $100 a tonne for the grain that he's growing, he would remove in-crop herbicides, fungicides and insecticides. And so an extra $100 a tonne with our pricing structure only translates to an extra 10 or 20 cents per kilo of flour. Like, the farmers are getting paid so little for what they're doing, and it's no wonder that they're not prepared to make risks in terms of adopting regenerative practices. And so I just think there's so much potential there in providing those growers a premium that, yeah, I'm really excited about that, clearly.
Gathering like-minded people to talk farming, soil and produce is always heartening and inspiring. Courtney is part of Grow Festival, a festival of regenerative food and farming at Kyneton Racecourse in Victoria on February 22. See the link in the show notes.
Yeah, so the Grow Festival is coming up on the 22nd of Feb, and I'm super pumped about the lineup of speakers. Joel Williams, in particular, has so much knowledge to share around regenerative cropping. But yeah, there's so many other great speakers, like Jade Miles and Jade Kaloran. And Ian and I will both be there. Ian's going to be on a panel and I'll be presenting as well on regenerative cropping. My other hat is I work for Soils for Life part-time, and I manage the Cropping Resilience project there. So I'll be sharing learnings from what we do here at Woodstock, but also what I've been learning, connecting with other farmers through my work at Soils for Life. So Soils for Life is a not-for-profit organisation, and we ran a bunch of stories and share case studies around regenerative agriculture. And we run events. We've got a podcast as well. We do a bunch of workshops and webinars, all aimed at supporting farmers to improve soil health.
Courtney and Ian have devoted their working lives to wheat. Why does she think wheat matters?
I think wheat is important because we eat so much of it. We grow so much of it. It's so much a part of, at least in Western cultures, it's so much a part of our traditions and our daily diet that we should really care about where it comes from and how it's grown and how we prepare it too. I think an analogy I really enjoy thinking about is that, wheat is a grass, but we are not ruminants. We don't have four stomachs like a cow. And so that's where things like sourdough fermentation is really important because, and making sure it's really high quality grain as well, because, our bodies aren't that well designed to consume a lot of wheat that's unfermented. So I think how we bake it and how we, what type of flours we are using, make them fresh, flavoursome and free of too many pesticides, then we're going to be looking after our health as well.
Farmer, advocate, fermentation fan. Courtney has a lot on her plate. What does she love about what she does?
I am clearly really passionate about the growing side of things, and that is my role in the business, is kind of managing the farm, and I'm also really passionate about the impact that we could have as a business and the impact that we already have. I love the marketing side as well, the challenge of trying to make flour sexy. Being producer and a farmer, like it's full of challenges, but I also kind of love that excitement of, not knowing what's in store. Every day is different. And that we get to connect with so many amazing bakers and chefs. And, most of our product goes to Melbourne, but we've got a bunch of amazing end users and customers here that they're so supportive and so friendly. We've made I feel very lucky that we get to be customer facing and so connected with the community than if we were just farming on our own.
Flour is a daily food for so many people, so growing good wheat and milling it into great flour feels like important work for Courtney and her family. Woodstock Grain and Milling produces stone ground, whole grain and organic flour from grain grown locally, purely, ethically. Through regenerative organic farming practices, they're supporting the land, their family, and the well-being of a community of bread eaters up and down the East Coast. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Dani Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.